Let's talk about the WNBA Finals.
The WNBA Finals were supposed to be a celebration of women's basketball at its highest level. Star power, drama, and passion on full display. But when A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner walked into arenas filled with rows of empty seats, the reality hit harder than any rivalry. What should have been the league's grandest moment turned into an awkward spectacle.
I believe y'all don't care. I think y'all care about the drama around it. I do believe that, but I don't think you care about the events itself. And judging by ticket prices, neither does anybody else.
Fans weren't showing up, ticket prices were plummeting, and the energy that once surrounded Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever was nowhere to be found. For two of the league's biggest stars, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was infuriating. Cameras caught their frustration, and microphones picked up their biting remarks about the lack of fan support. Yet beneath the anger was something deeper, a growing realization that without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA spotlight had dimmed, and no one seemed eager to watch anymore.
If ever there was proof that the Caitlin Clark fans / Fever fans are now the overwhelming majority of the fandom, look at ticket prices for finals games.
The build-up to the WNBA Finals should have been electric. Two powerhouse teams, elite talent on both sides, and MVP-level players ready to battle for the crown. But as game day approached, something felt off. There were no viral highlights flooding social media, no packed sports bars buzzing with excitement, and certainly no sold-out arenas. Instead, fans scrolling through ticket sites were stunned. Seats for the championship game were selling for as low as $35 for what's supposed to be the biggest stage of women's basketball. It felt like a ghost town in the making.
Game one, the get-in price for Game 1 matchup between the Aces and the Mercury for a WNBA Finals game. Holy hell, there's $35 seats right there. Right there. Plenty of good seats available.
Even A'ja Wilson, the face of the Las Vegas Aces and reigning MVP, couldn't hide her disappointment. She expected the finals to be loud, wild, and full of energy. But when she walked out for warm-ups and saw entire sections of empty red seats, she reportedly muttered under her breath, "This is the finals." It wasn't arrogance. It was disbelief.
Look at that. Wow. $35 whole dollars. This might be the best part of the video for the WNBA, because when you gauge the interest, to gauge the interest of this series, and it was ugly.
For years, players like Wilson and Bonner had fought to elevate the league's visibility. And yet, here they were, performing in front of scattered fans and cameras that couldn't avoid showing the gaps in the stands. DeWanna Bonner wasn't quiet about it either. After the first game, she looked visibly frustrated during post-game interviews. Her team had played hard, but the silence from the crowd was deafening. "You work your whole career for moments like this," she said, her tone sharp, "and you just hope people care enough to show up." That single quote summed up the emotional weight.
With DeWanna Bonner, Alyssa Thomas, and the Mercury in the finals against A'ja Wilson and the Aces, will you be locked in watching this series? ? Yes or no? Hit the poll. 4% of brave souls said yes. 96% said hail to the no.
Behind the finals, the players were realizing, in real time, that the hype surrounding the league might have been more fragile than they thought. Across social media, fans quickly noticed the lack of energy. Photos of empty seats went viral, sparking debates about what went wrong. Some blamed high ticket prices, others pointed fingers at the league's marketing strategy, and many pointed toward one name missing from the finals entirely. Caitlin Clark, the rookie, had reignited interest in women's basketball all season long. Her games with the Indiana Fever routinely drew record-breaking attendance and massive television ratings. But without her, the finals seemed to lose their spark.
Guys, if the Fever and Caitlin Clark was playing in a finals game, let's say against the Mercury, with all that drama around there, would there be a single ticket less than $300? Now, I mean, honestly, a single ticket less than $300. I don't think so. I think you'd have courtside seats go for $5,000. If Caitlin Clark was playing, if she was in these finals along with the Fever.
Meanwhile, league officials tried to spin the narrative, calling it a competitive matchup between two historic franchises. But fans weren't buying it. They wanted emotion, storylines, and a reason to care, something the league couldn't deliver this time. The finals were supposed to represent the pinnacle of competition, but instead, they exposed a painful truth. The WNBA's popularity still revolved around a handful of polarizing figures, and without them, the momentum vanished by the time Game 1 ended. The internet had already labeled it the quietest finals in WNBA history. The atmosphere inside the arena reflected a deeper issue, not a lack of talent, but a lack of connection. The stars were shining, but no one was watching. And that bitter reality was about to push A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner to their breaking point.
You are not invested, you are not interested in watching this BS transpire on your television sets.
After the first game ended, what should have been a proud moment turned into a boiling pot of frustration for A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner. Both veterans had poured their hearts into leading their teams to the finals, but instead of cheers and cameras flashing, they were met with awkward silence and half-empty arenas. The WNBA had promised growth, attention, and respect, yet it felt like the league had gone backward overnight. For A'ja and DeWanna, it wasn't just about attendance numbers. It was about feeling abandoned by the very fans they were told were finally embracing the league. In the post-game press conference, Wilson's frustration started to show. Her words were measured, but her tone carried weight. "We're playing some of the best basketball out there," she said, "but it's like nobody's watching." That simple statement spoke volumes. She wasn't wrong. National coverage was thin. Social media engagement had nosedived. And clips of the game barely made a ripple compared to the viral frenzy that followed every move Caitlin Clark made during the season. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Bonner, on the other hand, didn't hold back. She was blunt, emotional, and unapologetic. "It's disrespectful," she said. "We deserve packed arenas. We deserve to feel that energy." Her comments instantly spread across social platforms, with fans debating whether her anger was justified or misplaced. Some argued that she and other veterans had contributed to the divide in the fan base, while others sympathized, agreeing that the league's marketing focus had backfired by ignoring what fans truly wanted to see. That's when the narrative began to shift. What started as disappointment over low turnout transformed into a larger reflection of the WNBA's growing pains. Fans weren't just absent, they were disinterested. They had emotionally checked out after Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever were eliminated. Without her on the court, casual viewers stopped tuning in, and the finals lost their sense of urgency. It wasn't fair to Wilson or Bonner, but it was reality. The league's identity crisis was now being broadcast on live television. Inside locker rooms, tension was growing. Players whispered about how the league had mishandled the opportunity to build momentum around the new surge of popularity. Many believed the WNBA leaned too hard on narratives of rivalry and resentment instead of celebrating unity and growth. Others felt that the commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, had done little to bridge the widening gap between veteran players and the new wave of fans drawn in by Clark's appeal. That resentment began boiling over into public view, and A'ja and DeWanna's frustration became the face of that discontent. The next day, clips of their interviews circulated online, sparking a new storm. Fans mocked the empty arenas, while critics accused the league of failing its stars. And behind the scenes, sources claimed that both players had privately vented their anger toward WNBA officials for downplaying the embarrassing optics. What started as disappointment was now turning into defiance, and the world was about to see just how raw their emotions could get. Game 2 of the WNBA Finals was supposed to reset the tone. The league doubled down on promotion, offered discounted tickets, and tried to flood social media with hype. But when tip-off came, The sight was nearly identical. Swaths of empty seats, quiet stands, and fans scrolling on their phones instead of cheering. For players like Aja Wilson and DeWanna, it was the last straw. What followed wasn't a meltdown in the traditional sense, it was the eruption of years of pent-up frustration, broadcast for everyone to see during a timeout in the second quarter. Cameras caught Aja slamming her towel against the bench, visibly angry. She exchanged sharp words with teammates and glared toward the stands, muttering under her breath. Moments later, Bonner was seen shaking her head in disbelief after missing a layup, then shouting something toward the crowd. The microphones didn't pick it up clearly, but lip readers online wasted no time decoding her message. Something about nobody caring? Within hours, clips of both players went viral across sports social media. Fans immediately took sides. Supporters of Aja and Bonner defended their emotions, saying they were tired of carrying the league without proper support. Others mocked the scene, calling it the tantrum of the century. Comment sections exploded with sarcasm. Maybe if they stopped hating Caitlin Clark, they'd have fans in the seats. It was harsh, but it captured a growing sentiment. People felt the veterans who mocked or dismissed Clark earlier in the season were now facing the consequences of alienating the audience she brought in. By the post-game press conference, tension filled the air. Reporters treaded carefully, but one question lit the fuse. When asked about the visible frustration during the game, Bonner exhaled sharply before responding. "It's embarrassing. We put everything into this, and people act like it doesn't matter." Wilson nodded beside her, expression tense. "We shouldn't have to beg for respect," she added. Her voice cracked slightly, not from anger, but exhaustion. It was the sound of a superstar realizing that effort alone couldn't fix the league's fractured relationship with its fans. The clip of that exchange was replayed endlessly. ESPN debated whether the league was in crisis. Commentators pointed out that just a few months earlier, Aja and others were frustrated about the media attention Caitlin Clark was getting, but now they were pleading for the same spotlight. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very players who had once been seen as the face of the WNBA were now symbols of its struggle. Behind closed doors, team staff reportedly urged both players to cool down and avoid feeding the controversy. But it was too late. The tantrum had become the story. For the first time, the finals weren't about basketball. They were about pride, resentment, and the uncomfortable truth that the league's biggest stars couldn't fill arenas. Without the one player they had tried so hard to overshadow, and that realization would only fuel what came next. A full-blown war of words between players, fans, and the league itself. By the morning after Game 2, the story had spun completely out of control. What began as frustration on the court had transformed into a full-blown public showdown between WNBA fans and its own stars. Social media platforms lit up with thousands of comments, memes, and video edits mocking Aja Wilson and DeWanna's reactions. Clips of them fuming courtside were being stitched with captions like, "You wanted Caitlin gone? Now look around," and "Empty seats don't clap back." The tone wasn't just sarcastic, it was brutal. Fans were done being polite. What made this backlash sting even more was that it came from the league's most loyal followers, the ones who had watched every Fever game, bought merchandise, and shared highlight reels all season long. These weren't trolls. These were people who had poured energy into the WNBA's growth, only to feel alienated by veteran players' dismissive attitude toward Caitlin Clark. The finals, instead of uniting fans around the game, had deepened a cultural divide inside the sport. On one side were the veterans who believed the league had earned its growth. On the other were new fans who credited Clark with bringing that attention in the first place. Aya's frustration only fueled the storm. In a now-deleted tweet, she seemed to take a jab at bandwagon fans who only show up for one player. It was probably meant to defend the league's broader legacy, but the internet didn't take it that way. Replies poured in, accusing her of bitterness and hypocrisy. Screenshots spread like wildfire. DeWanna didn't post anything herself, but her silence became its own statement. Reporters at practice the next day said both stars looked visibly drained, not just from the games, but from the relentless wave of online criticism. Meanwhile, the numbers told their own story. TV ratings for the finals had dropped almost 50% compared to the semifinals that featured Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever. Commentators on sports networks couldn't ignore it anymore. "You can feel the difference," one analyst said. "This isn't about the game. It's about who fans want to see representing the league." That one sentence became the quote of the week, echoing across every talk show and YouTube sports channel. Even neutral players started speaking out. Some called for unity, while others subtly acknowledged that the finals lacked the spark Clark brought. It was a rare moment of honesty, and one that made Cathy Engelbert's job even harder. The commissioner tried to control the narrative by praising both teams' resilience and leadership, but her comments sounded hollow next to the empty bleachers shown on live TV. For Aja and DeWanna, the anger that started courtside had come full circle. Their outburst had exposed a painful reality. The league's stars and its fans were no longer on the same page. The WNBA had dreamed of this finals being a breakthrough moment. Instead, it had become a mirror, reflecting every flaw, every grudge, and every missed opportunity to keep the fans truly engaged. And by the time Game 3 approached, the silence between players and supporters had turned into something far louder: resentment. By the time the finals reached Game 3, the controversy had grown too big for the league office to ignore. Fans were angry, players were frustrated, and the media was circling like vultures. So when WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert appeared at the pre-game press conference, everyone knew the tension in the room was about to erupt. She tried to open with optimism, praising the athletes, the competition, and the historic growth of the league. But her words rang hollow against the backdrop of half-empty arenas and plunging ratings. The questions from reporters came fast, sharp, and unrelenting. One journalist broke the ice with a question everyone was thinking: "Commissioner, how do you explain record low attendance and fan disinterest in the finals?" Engelbert froze for a brief second, forced a tight smile, and responded with a rehearsed answer. She blamed scheduling conflicts, marketing fatigue, and misleading narratives online. But the reporters weren't buying it. The follow-up question hit harder. Isn't this about how the league handled Caitlin Clark's rise and the fan backlash that followed? That was the moment the press room shifted. Engelbert's face stiffened, her tone turned defensive, and her calm facade cracked. "This isn't about one player," she said. "We have incredible talent across the board." But the way she said it, with that clipped frustration, only made things worse. Within minutes, clips of her answer hit social media, and fans seized on it. Hashtags like #WithoutCaitlin and #Engelbert began trending across X and TikTok. It wasn't just criticism, it was open rebellion from a fan base that felt unheard. Aja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner, who had stayed quiet since their outbursts, suddenly found themselves in the middle of the storm. Engelbert's comments made them look complicit, as if they too refused to acknowledge what was obvious, that Caitlin Clark had become the heartbeat of the WNBA. The league's reluctance to embrace that reality was now backfiring on everyone involved. Even neutral analysts, who had defended Engelbert in the past, admitted that her tone-deaf answers only widened the gap between leadership and the fans who once fueled the league's historic viewership spike. Inside the arena, things weren't any better. Cameras panned across rows of empty seats, and broadcasters awkwardly avoided showing the upper sections. The tension was palpable. You could feel it in the subdued energy, in the tight expressions on players' faces, in the way every missed shot felt heavier than it should. The finals weren't just about basketball anymore. They had become a referendum on leadership, on fan loyalty, and on the league's future. By the end of her press conference, Engelbert looked exhausted. She tried to pivot back to positivity, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Her defensiveness had poured gasoline on a fire she couldn't contain. And as the headlines rolled in, Engelbert melts down. Fans turn on WNBA leadership, empty seats. Empty words, one truth became impossible to deny. The league was in crisis, and its own commissioner had just made it worse. Behind closed doors, the tension inside the WNBA had reached a boiling point. Players, coaches, and executives were walking on eggshells, trying to hold the finals together, while the league's reputation unraveled in real time. What was supposed to be a celebration of women's basketball had turned into a crisis of confidence. And Cathy Engelbert's shaky press conference only deepened the cracks. Inside team hotels, whispers spread players were angry, not just at the fans, but at the leadership that had put them in this position. A'ja Wilson reportedly vented in the locker room after Game 3, saying she was tired of being the scapegoat. "We show up, we work, we play hard, and somehow it's always our fault," she told teammates, according to one insider. DeWanna Bonner, sitting nearby, didn't say much, but her silence spoke volumes. Both women had been under fire for their visible frustration. Yet neither could deny the truth. The finals had become an embarrassing display of disconnect between players and fans. The excitement, the media buzz, even the basic sense of competition. All of it felt hollow without the energy that Caitlin Clark had brought earlier in the season. Within league offices, executives scrambled to contain the fallout. PR teams drafted talking points to steer interviews away from the empty arenas. Social media managers tried flooding feeds with empowering highlight clips to change the narrative. But every attempt felt forced. Fans weren't fooled. They were still sharing side-by-side comparisons, showing packed Fever games versus the barren finals. The comments were brutal. "You chased away your audience," one fan wrote. "Now, you're playing for yourselves." Some players from other teams began speaking privately about the growing resentment within the league. Many younger athletes, who had seen firsthand how Caitlin Clark's popularity lifted everyone's paycheck, were frustrated that veterans treated her like an outsider. One anonymous player admitted, "A lot of us are just tired of the drama. We just want the league to grow." That quiet statement reflected what the WNBA was afraid to face. The real divide wasn't just between fans and the league. It was between the old guard and the new era. Engelbert held an emergency meeting with representatives from both finals teams, urging them to focus on the game and not engage with the social media noise. But by that point, it was too late. The damage had already spread beyond the court. Sports media outlets like ESPN, Fox, and online shows such as Black and White Sports were all dissecting the league's implosion, framing it as a cautionary tale about pride, politics, and poor marketing. Inside the locker rooms, morale was at an all-time low. Players weren't just tired physically, they were emotionally drained. Every headline felt personal, every tweet another jab. The finals had turned into survival mode. And as the pressure mounted, both A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner were left asking the same painful question. If the fans had already walked away, who were they still playing for? By the time the series neared its final stretch, the WNBA's worst nightmare became reality. The numbers started coming in. The league couldn't spin it anymore. Attendance was at a historic low. Television viewership had plummeted nearly 50% from the semifinals, and social engagement dropped off a cliff. What should have been the proudest moment of the season turned into a sobering reflection of just how fragile the league's success really was. The Caitlin Clark effect wasn't a theory anymore, it was a measurable truth staring Kathy and the players right in the face. Sports networks quietly reported that game. Two of the finals barely drew a fraction of the audience that Fever games had generated earlier in the season. Analysts on talk shows didn't sugarcoat it. "Fans have spoken," one said bluntly. "They're watching for stories, not slogans." And right now, the WNBA isn't telling one worth following. That single comment spread everywhere. It was the dagger that defined the moment. Inside the locker rooms, both teams were aware of the numbers. Players tried to block it out, but the headlines were impossible to ignore. "Lowest finals ratings in a decade," one article read. "Empty seats and empty promises," said another. Even those who had defended the league all year were now questioning its direction. It wasn't about talent. The finals had plenty of that. It was about connection. Fans no longer felt emotionally tied to the league's biggest stars, and the organization's refusal to acknowledge that divide made things worse. For A'ja Wilson, it was a wake-up call. Behind the scenes, she was reportedly emotional after seeing the viewership data. She'd worked her entire career to bring legitimacy to women's basketball, yet the biggest season of her life was being remembered for apathy, not achievement. "It hurts," she confided to a teammate. "We did everything right on the court, but it still feels like nobody cares." Bonner felt the same. Despite her long career, she couldn't shake the thought that the league had lost its identity. "You can't ignore the fans," she told staff quietly. "They decide who matters." Meanwhile, Kathy Engelbert held another press briefing, trying once more to shift focus toward positive growth metrics. But the media wasn't buying it. Questions about empty seats, player frustration, and fan backlash dominated every interview. She looked increasingly defensive, repeating that the league was moving in the right direction. The problem was, the numbers on the screen said otherwise. Every statistic, every poll, every chart told the same story. The league without Caitlin Clark wasn't just struggling, it was invisible. The finals ended up being remembered not for who won, but for what they revealed. The WNBA's leadership could no longer deny that its biggest star wasn't on the court, she was sitting at home, still dominating every conversation. And as the trophy was lifted in front of rows of empty seats, one truth echoed louder than the celebration. The league's future depended on whether it could finally embrace the player who made people care again. As the confetti fell on the WNBA finals, the celebration felt hollow. Cameras tried to focus on smiling faces, but the wide shots told a different story. More empty chairs than cheering fans, more awkward silence than excitement. What should have been a defining moment for the league was instead a turning point. The numbers, the optics, the fan reactions, everything pointed to the same conclusion. The WNBA had mishandled its biggest opportunity in years, and now the fallout had begun. Sports journalists wasted no time calling it out. This finals exposed the league, one headline read. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA's pulse flatlined. On talk shows and YouTube commentary channels, the conversation shifted from basketball to accountability. Fans weren't just questioning the players anymore, they were asking whether Cathy Engelbert was fit to lead. Her dismissive responses to reporters, her unwillingness to address the growing divide, and her defensive tone had turned a leadership problem into a full-blown crisis. Behind the scenes, executives tried to calm the storm. Meetings were held with team owners to discuss damage control. Ideas were floated about restructuring marketing strategies and rebuilding relationships with the fan base. But the issue went deeper than promotion. It was about trust. Fans felt disrespected, alienated, and ignored. Many of them had entered the WNBA ecosystem because of Caitlin Clark's arrival, only to be met with hostility from the very players they were told to support. The finals had exposed that ugly truth, and no press release could fix it. Meanwhile, A'ja Wilson and DeWanna Bonner found themselves at a crossroads. Their public frustration, once seen as passion, was now viewed as arrogance by many fans. The tantrums, the press conference, tension, and the dismissive attitude toward newcomers had damaged their image. Wilson, realizing this, attempted to soften her tone in later interviews, acknowledging that the league needed to grow together. Bonner, however, remained defiant, insisting that real fans stay loyal no matter what. But loyalty had become a luxury the WNBA could no longer demand. As the dust settled, the league was left facing its harshest reality yet. Growth wasn't guaranteed. The Caitlin Clark phenomenon had proven that interest in women's basketball could skyrocket, but only if the league nurtured it instead of fighting it. The finals became a symbol of what happens when ego overrides evolution. The fans didn't abandon the game, they abandoned the attitude that came with it by the end of the week. Social media was flooded with one phrase: Cathy must go. Petitions circulated, demanding new leadership that actually listened to fans and embraced the sport's changing identity. Sponsors were watching closely. Networks were reconsidering deals. The message was clear. The league could no longer survive on pride alone. As the lights dimmed in the empty arena, one haunting question lingered. Had the WNBA just witnessed its wake-up call, or its warning shot? The answer would determine everything about its future. When the finals ended, the scoreboard didn't matter, the silence did. What should have been a crowning moment for the WNBA turned into a mirror reflecting everything the league refused to confront. A'ja Wilson's anger, DeWanna Bonner's frustration, and Cathy Engelbert's defensiveness weren't isolated moments. They were symptoms of a system disconnected from its audience. Fans had spoken with their wallets, their tweets, and their absence. They didn't hate women's basketball, they hated feeling dismissed. The league that once dreamed of unity had fractured into pride, politics, and lost opportunity. The truth is simple. The WNBA doesn't have a marketing problem. It has a humility problem. And until it learns to embrace the very player who made millions care again, every finals will look just like this one, a championship played in an echo chamber, waiting for an audience that already moved on.